9.
The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Live from the New Scientist Labs, Janine Young, newscientist.com.
Yes, joining us in Melbourne City, Janine Young via live Skype video. Come on in, Janine. How you doing?
I'm well, thanks, Wammo. How are you?
Very well indeed. And some of that bad weather gone, because Victoria has had a really tough time of it. Just, not as bad as Queensland, but still pretty bad.
Yes, I heard on the radio this morning that Dimbulla, a town out in Western Victoria, is being evacuated. A whole bunch of Victorian towns have really suffered. Horsham, another town, it's actually a relatively large one out there. Kerrang, which is up on the border. Look, it's not as bad as Queensland. The scale of devastation is not as bad, but there are still people that are suffering, and we've still got a lot of water. The entire eastern seaboard is basically a lake at the moment, while we have fires in WA. Go figure.
Yeah. When it rains, it pours actually rings 100% true, right?
Totally, unfortunately, in our case. We haven't seen rain like this for a very long time. Yeah. I'm told that the weather patterns in Queensland used to be like that, obviously not in this scale, but it used to be that it would rain at 3 o'clock every afternoon. So it would be very mumuch like the monsoon, like you see in tropical places. So things may be returning to something fairly similar to what they used to be with the La Nina effect, but either way, the devastation is still incredible, and the clean-up is now starting, but it's not good.
No, not good at all. Well, our first bit of research this morning still actually comes from Australia, from the Prince of Wales Hospital in Sydney. Now, at the end of last year, we had a story about taking poos from one person and putting it into another. This kind of relates to that.
Because once just isn't enough with a story like this. You've got to keep on giving. I'm sure that unsettled a few people, and it was a bit disgusting, and they didn't really like it and all that kind of thing. But the concept of treating people's diseases with a consideration for what's going on in their gut, again, I'm attempting to be delicate about this, so I'm not going to be rude or anything like that.
Sure.
But looking at people's gut flora, so the bacteria and the other nasties that could be living down there, and considering what effect they might have on disease, is not necessarily a new field, but it is something that's gaining more currency and more credibility. Diseases such as Parkinson's disease, obesity, so metabolic disease that is associated with that, multiple sclerosis, chronic fatigue, even things like rheumatoid arthritis may have a basis in the gut flora and the infections, effectively, that we develop in our guts. It can be various parts of it, doesn't really matter which bit you're talking about, but people who have had Parkinson's disease and have been treated with antibiotics or fecal transplants, and again, we talked about that at the end of last year. Basically, you take a healthy person's stool sample and then you transplant it into someone else, and people get better. Has been shown to improve some, and this is by no means a cure, but some people's Parkinson's symptoms. And this is a really weird concept when you think about it.
Yeah.
What's going on in our guts possibly have to do with something like rheumatoid arthritis or Parkinson's? And the idea is based in evidence that shows that some people who have Parkinson's do have damage to their enteric nerve. That feeds basically and deals with the entire gastrointestinal system. So it helps control how things are digested and the like. So damaging that nerve means that you then don't have proper communication through the vagus nerve, which, again, studies have shown damage in Parkinson's begins in the vagus nerve and then travels up towards the brain from there. It travels up to the brainstem and the like. So showing that there's been damage in these areas, and then looking at the gut flora, people are kind of tying this together and saying, well, it seems then perhaps if you actually have issues down there, then you can damage a nerve, which means that you can have flow-on effects. And they think for rheumatoid arthritis that if you actually have an infection effectively set up in your gut, then you're unleashing vast amounts of antigens, which is what your immune system's going to react to. If it sees it as being something that shouldn't be there, it's going to go for a massive response, which is what rheumatoid arthritis is. It's autoimmune. You start destroying your own joints. Then they think that unless you clear that infection completely, fecal transplant, then you're not ever going to be able to deal with the underlying cause of the arthritis in the first place. So this is pretty weird sounding stuff, and they're not saying that they're going to be cures, and they don't understand everything about it, but it's certainly a really interesting starting point to be able to look at some of these diseases. Diabetes, obesity, big problems in the developed world, and if you can do simple things like changing the gut flora of, say, an obese person, because they do have a different population than lean people do, then that could be another way of being able to treat obesity and the metabolic syndrome that goes along with it.
Yeah. Now, I know that that people with conditions like Parkinson's can get rather desperate and hang their hopes on research like this, but this is very early, isn't it, in this stage?
This is not, as I said, I keep emphasising, this is not a cure. They're not saying that they know what's going on. It's another line of inquiry, another thing to look at, another way of trying to understand the disease. The fact that a man who had constipation and Parkinson's syndrome and was treated with antibiotics and then lost his Parkinson's symptoms, it sounds like a miracle, and for him it probably is. That's not to say that every other person who has Parkinson's is going to be able to be treated in this way. They are recruiting for a trial at the moment in Sydney for people who have constipation and Parkinson's. So they are trying to pursue this line of inquiry, but no, please, anyone who does have these issues, problems, symptoms, don't pin your hopes on this. It's just a line of inquiry. But it's certainly a really interesting one because it does apply potentially to a lot of different diseases. And again, if you can do something to make things just a little bit better in the long term, that might help.
Definitely. Well, on to something slightly different now. You hear a lot about these research trials where you can go and make some money by taking some drugs and being part of a test subject. But would you put yourself through torture for research? That's a good question, Janine.
I'm a softie. The idea doesn't really appeal. However, there are, as you say, researchers at the University of Oxford who are looking at pain responses in just ordinary people inside an MRI scanner. They've done things like basically torturing them, as you say, with pin pricks. It could be putting capsaicin, which is the active ingredient in chilies and the like, on the back of your hand. Oh. They've even done really rather unsettling things like putting a balloon up someone's rectum and inflating it.
Oh, goodness.
I know. I read that one. Just went, ooh.
It doesn't sound like research.
Well, they then ask people to rate the extent of pain. And this is not just because they're a little bit, out there, they need a little bit of help. This is all in the name of genuine science. They're trying to look at people's responses to pain and trying to identify the regions inside the brain that are responsible for it. This is all neuroimaging. So different parts of your brain light up when you're doing different things. And so they're trying to look at the neurological and the psychological processes that go into how we recognise, feel and manage pain. Because over time people have realised that if you have, say, a toothache and you get absorbed in a really good book or a really good movie, sometimes that pain can go away for a little while. So it suggests that there are other mechanisms going on in our brain than just the ability to be able to recognise the pain, and then that's all we deal with. Pain recognition inside our brains is incredibly complex. It involves a lot of different regions, and so it's one of those things that it's not enough to just say that we have one centre and if we prod here, it'll make it better. Things like attention, our mood. If you're depressed, you experience pain a lot more than if you're, say, in a good mood and everything's hunky-dory and you're happy.
Yeah.
Your emotions are really important. People who have chronic back pain, they're found to have changes to the brain structure. So instead of just recognising the pain and then moving on and dealing with it, over time the structure changes so that it's actually amplifying that pain over time. And that's a really interesting idea, because if you're seeing that you do have changes in brain structure, then how do you treat that compared to with someone who has, say, just an acute pain of surgery, for example. So it does have a really interesting and potentially very useful way of being able to help people deal with pain in the short and the long term.
Cool. Okay. Well, those stories you can find in the New Scientist magazine coming out next week, and also newscientist.com. Janine, we will see you next week as well.
See you later.